They're supposed to be creating an atmosphere of order so that people could actually gather together as a family of believers and worship God. But the sons are actually nudging them out and interrupting their prayers and so forth. Second thing is they're taking the part of the offering that belonged to God alone. So they're robbing from God. And so you shouldn't be surprised to hear what comes next. Continuing on. So the sin of these young men was very serious in the Lord's sight, for they treated the Lord's offerings with contempt. And that's not all. Eli's sons were sleeping with the women who served at the entrance to the worship center. I want to continue at verse 22. Now Eli was very old, but he was aware of what his sons were doing to the people of Israel. He knew, for instance, that his sons were seducing the young women who assisted at the entrance to the tabernacle. Eli said to them, I've been hearing reports from all the people about the wicked things that you are doing. Why do you keep on sinning? Now there are a few things wrong with this picture that I want to touch on for a second. First of all, it mentions people of Israel, people being plural, all right? People are being affected here. And then it goes on further and by saying that they're seducing women, not a woman, they're seducing women, plural again. And then it goes on to say that Eli had been receiving reports, plural again. In other words, this had been going on for some time, and it was affecting many people. And Eli had been hearing all these different reports. And the question I have is, why didn't Eli intervene when he first heard about this? Why didn't he step in to put a stop to this unacceptable behavior? Well, to these questions, we need to read on to get an answer. Verse 24 following. Eli said, You must stop, my sons. The reports I hear among the Lord's people are not good. If someone sins against another person, God can mediate for the guilty party. But if someone sins against the Lord, who can intercede? So at some point, Eli has had enough. And I'm curious as a parent, what did it take for Eli to step in and intervene? But he finally does confront his sons. But looking at what he says here in God's Word, do you see any consequence for their behavior? Does Eli do anything to make his sons stop? No. All he does is warn them. Does this sound familiar from parenting today? No consequences. No insistence that the behavior stop. All he does is warn them. He essentially says, listen, you can sin against people and maybe you'll get away with it. But if you sin against God, well, you're setting yourselves up for some trouble. Earlier, we talked about wishy-washy parenting. Is it effective? Not at all. Now, suppose you're a betting man. What are the chances that Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are going to listen to what their dad says? Verse 25b. But Eli's sons wouldn't listen to their father. They're going to continue to interrupt worshipers. They're going to continue to seduce women at the worship center. Unbelievable. Earlier we learned that there are consequences for wishy-washy parenting. Kids who grow up without understanding limits, kids who can't live by a budget, kids who can't distinguish between needs and wants, or put the priority on needs over wants, kids who struggle with relationships because they're used to getting their own way, kids who can't accept responsibility for the consequences of their behaviors because mom and dad have helicoptered them out of the situations. There are consequences for wishy-washy parenting, and they're not good. But if you thought the consequences that I just highlighted were not good, listen to what happens to Eli and his sons. God was going to punish them. Eli is going to get punished for honoring his relationship with his sons above God, and Hophni and Phinehas, the sons, are going to be punished for their wicked ways. How? Well, first of all, God is going to remove his blessing from the family of this priest Eli. In other words, down the road, the promise that he made to them is that they would continue to be priests. But God removes that, and so nobody else from Eli's family was going to be able to be priests for long. What's more, God would remove his protective umbrella from Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas. Consequently, It isn't long before they're murdered. They're killed. Now, thankfully, hopefully, us parents today won't experience physical death as a result of our inability to say no to our kids. Hopefully, those kids who are being raised in homes today won't experience physical death as a result of their parents not being able to force them to live with limits at times. But I'll argue that failure here on our part as parents will set our children up for a life far below what God intends for them. God doesn't give rules to be a killjoy. He gives rules because He's all-knowing. I mean, He created this whole deal, as Grant was talking about. He knows how life functions best on planet Earth and anywhere else in the universe for that matter. And so He gives us rules and guidelines and direction and discipline so that we'll choose the right path and we'll live an abundant life. And He gives clear instructions for parenting in His Word because He wants us parents to take the same approach with our kids. Did I ever tell you about the story of when I ran away from home? I don't think so. I don't remember what it was over anymore. Most kids who run away from home forget those details, but I know that it was in grade 4 or 5. We were living in Barrie. And after my mom said no to me about something, I can't remember what it was. It was probably some movie I wanted to go and see. I decided to show my mom who was boss. So I told my mom that if I didn't get my way, I was going to run away. It was a threat. Can you believe my threat didn't work? I couldn't believe it. Mom stuck to her guns and she wouldn't budge, not even an inch. Now I was even angrier. So I stormed off to the foyer and I put on my shoes and grabbed my jacket and I said, "See ya." And so I walk off in a huff across our front yard and up the sidewalk. We lived on a hill, so I'm going up the sidewalk. And, I mean, I'm just booting like one of those Olympic speed walkers. You know how ridiculous they look? Like they're just booting along. If this is a bigger stage, I'd show you. Well, about the time that I got out of eyesight of my mom, so I'm a couple houses up the street now. Trees are blocking her view of me and stuff. Logic starts clicking in again. And I begin to realize I hadn't thought through this whole running away thing very well. First of all, it was fall. All I had was a light jacket. It was supper time, and it was going to be pretty cold in a couple of hours. Second, I'm real stupid here, right? I didn't pack a suitcase. I didn't empty my bank account, all a couple $100 that I had, or whatever. There was no planning here. And I'll never forget this. I'm heading up the sidewalk looking like that guy over there. And with each consideration, as logic is returning, my pace gets slower and slower. And it's like, huffing along, and then I slow down on the trip there. And it's every thought, every rational thought that came, I got slower and slower, and eventually I'm walking like this. All right? I'm thinking to myself, I'm not prepared for life on my own. I had it pretty good at home. And even though Mom said no, and I'm still angry about that, I know that she does love me. And I'll probably have a hard time finding someone else that'll love me the way that she does. I made it 2 blocks. All right? 2 blocks from our house, there was this lookout over Kempenfelt Bay. And there was a bench there, and I went and I sat on the bench for about an hour. And it wasn't because I didn't know what I needed to do. I was racking my brain to see if there was a dignified way to go home. There wasn't. But I returned anyway. And even though there were other times I felt like running away, especially in my teenage years, I never did. And I never even threatened to run away again because it never worked the first time. For her, sticking to her guns and her no was the best thing that my mother could have ever done for me. If she had backed down when I threatened to walk away, I would have walked all over her that day and each subsequent day throughout my childhood and teenage years. So Mom, if you're watching this on YouTube in Florida where it's nice and warm and there's no snow, I'll just say, way to go. You did the right thing. Amazing. It only took me 29 years to say that. Sometimes parents have to wait a long time to hear that their no made a difference, that it was worth it that it paid off. Will your no be challenged? Most definitely.